Welcome to Communication 100. This is the online version of the course. So this introductory PowerPoint is basically the kind of thing that I would normally do in the traditional classroom by walking you through the syllabus and answering some of the most common questions. As a result, this episode is going to be pretty text heavy. Later on, there'll be a little more visual, a little less text heavy, and even the occasional video that I'll do just of me speaking. But for now, let's just begin with some of the basics as to what we're going to be doing in the class. Now, if you're already listening to this narration, the good news is you're probably not going to need what's on this slide, except for point number 3. So hold on just a second till I get there. I basically just included this text slide so that people who might not have figured out their audio settings can get a little guidance about how to turn on the slideshow and how to make sure the sounds were showing. So if you're already hearing me, great. But for number 3 here, you'll notice that you can also download an MP4 version of each one of these presentations, so there'll be both the PowerPoint with narrations or just a plain video. The reason I say that is that downloading an MP4 is actually a really good way to study, because you can play it in the background after you've already watched the video once and taken notes on it. Just hearing me reiterate some of these common examples and applications might help you study in the future. The preview of our course is going to go over the primary assignments, which is the primary question most of you will have. Then I'll talk about a couple of tips for how to handle taking an online class, as well as cover the basic course policies and how grading is done, as well as discuss some additional resources that have been offered for this class. So let's begin by reviewing the basic primary assignments we'll have in the class. Make sure to ask questions about any of these, even if they are quite a ways down the road, so that we can be sure you're on the same footing as we get through the course. The most basic concept we'll be continuing to use is a discussion. This will use the online format. Students need to engage each other to get the most out of course material. We have to try to overcome the fact that because you're taking this in an online setting, you're not going to get much interaction with each other. And that is actually really valuable for several reasons. First, intellectually, when you put an idea out there, it's easier for me to see whether or not you really understand what you're talking about. So for example, if I present a course term and then I ask you guys to discuss it, the examples you bring up make it more clear whether or not you really understand the material, and hearing other people talk about it might give you new ideas or new ways to remember the material so that it has better traction in your mind. Additionally, it's also emotionally useful to hear this kind of stuff, especially when it comes to something like public speaking. Because presentations can often cause people to be nervous, one of the best things that can happen to you is hearing that other people see it the same way that you do, or are triggered or affected by the same kinds of elements. That emotional support will make you feel less weird about public speaking, and that'll make you feel more confident. Also, it's just good to have that socialization so that you begin to support each other, begin to notice each other's improvements, and the process of critiquing will also include this. Now, the way it'll work is I'll post a question or topic each week via Foxtail. And the first week's topic, for example, is going to be, why are people afraid of public speaking? If you personally tend to be fairly nervous about public speaking, then you could talk about your own feelings on this, or you could talk about other folks or other examples that tend to fit into your mind. Now, the way I'd like you to do this is I want to view at least 2 interactions per topic that I present. That means that the first person who posts can go ahead and post whatever they'd like, but I'd like everybody else to try to get in the habit of not just presenting their own ideas, but responding to each other. So be sure to address the previous topic before adding a new one. Say, for example, somebody talked about being nervous in a job interview. Begin by responding to that post, and then after you've done so, you can either respond to another post you've located or start your own thread about something that you think is interesting. The way these will work in the class is that I've scheduled virtually everything to be due at 8 p.m. That way you know that 8 p.m. most nights you should be worried about whether or not you've turned in the things you need to turn in for this class. I try to keep that schedule fairly locked in. Now for the discussions, it's going to be on Thursdays. That's when I close it down, which means you won't be able to submit new material, and then I'll begin grading it and finish the grading by the following day. That's my deadline for you. So your deadline's Thursday night at 8 p.m., and I'll have given you feedback to everything by Friday at 8 p.m. There will be 8 discussions worth 5 points each for a total of 40 points. Now, we don't have a final exam in this course, so instead what we have are quizzes, and the quizzes are fairly short, usually 5 questions. They'll be administered through Foxtail, and there will be two different kinds of quizzes because there are different kinds of knowledge I want to be sure that you're getting. Now, the most common kind of question we'll have in the class are questions that focus on jargon, the technical words that we use in the field. Many of the things that we talk about in public speaking will probably make sense to you. You just won't know the terminology yet, and that's one of the things I want to be sure is setting in. So for those, I use a lot of multiple choice or even matching questions. Now the other ones, especially later in the quarter, are more focused on application and evaluation, short answer questions. So what I would do here is I might give you one or two unusual situations and ask you to explain how you would approach speaking in that situation. Or I might give you an example speech and ask you about specific parts of it so that you can show me that you understand how to assess a speech. There will be one quiz per week, so that's 8, plus 2 unscheduled quizzes. The reason I leave 2 out there is that if I notice that everybody got the same questions wrong, that basically says that I didn't teach it well enough, and I want to go ahead and reteach the material and then probably do a new quiz. If we don't need them, that's simply going to be 20 extra free points. Now on to the speeches. Now this is just going to be a brief preview. Each one of these speeches will be explained in more detail on later presentations, but I wanted to give you a basic idea of the 4 speeches you're going to be doing over the course of this class. All the due dates are on the schedule, and I'll even give you some worksheets that explain exactly how each one of these is graded. But here's just the rough idea. The first speech we're going to do is a narrative speech, which is worth 25 points. The good news is you get the 25 points based on virtually nothing but your ability to do a video and get it to me in which you tell a story. The reason it's so short and so lax on the grading is that I want you to simply tell a story. It does, 1, let me assess your specific strengths and weaknesses as speaker. So I'll hear things like, do you have a bit of a speech impediment, or do you have good eye contact, things like that, so that I can start giving you some feedback. It also lets you get more comfortable using video, and it helps me do a test run to make sure that your ability to turn in the assignments is working before we start having some big points coming down the pike. Speaking of big points, the first major speech then is the informative speech, which includes an outline and a visual aid. We'll talk more about how to do visual aids in a bit. This speech is worth 100 points. The focus of the 6-minute speech is that you provide an informational discussion of a controversial issue. Now here's what I mean by that. You have all kinds of political, religious, or personal feelings about all kinds of issues, and that's great. But we need to spot the difference between informing an audience and persuading them. So when I tell you to be informational, what I'm saying is you need to simply give us the objective background of the information. Here's a great example. Just about everybody has a pretty strong opinion about abortion, but you could do an informational discussion about something related to abortion. Say, for example, talk about in vitro fertilization and how some folks are divided over whether or not in vitro fertilization is a legitimate way to conceive a child, because often many embryos are left behind. When that happens, some people get upset. Notice how in my discussion of it, I didn't tell you how I feel about it one way or the other. I simply let you know about the information on this controversial issue. It's graded primarily on how you put a speech together, the speech structure, the parts of the speech, how you use research and the visual aids, and also how you prepare the things like outlines, note cards, and a bibliography so that you can build a good speech. Notice the whole focus of this speech is on writing it and building it, not on delivery. Delivery is still a small part of the grade, but my main focus is the moving parts of the speech. Now that we've established the basic structure of speeches and got you more comfortable to technology, we can move on to what is the most difficult and important speech in the class, which is a persuasive speech. The persuasive speech would include an outline once again and is worth a total of 150 points. The 6-minute speech builds on the informative speech to make an argument that the audience should take a specific action. That means it can't just be something about changing our mind, it actually has to get us to do something. So there has to be a behavioral element in your thesis. For example, convincing us that racism is bad is almost purely mental. But telling us about an action we could do to try to address it or educate ourselves or something like that would be a much more active speech, and that's one of the key requirements for this assignment. It'll build on the informative speech in terms of the outline. Then it'll also include more emphasis on delivery, language, and audience analysis based on polling data. What that polling data means is once I've got all of your thesis ideas for this speech, I'm going to put together a poll that all of you will respond to so you can see what all of the other students in the class think of your topic and get an idea as to how hostile they are toward the idea you're presenting. The assignment will also be developed further as we get later into the course. Now, not only can you do the same topic for both speeches of the informative and persuasive variety, I really encourage you to do so because it means the research will be better. It means you'll actually be able to go further with the second speech because you'll have already done a lot of the informative stuff in the first one. For the cool down, this final assignment takes advantage of the fact that we have such a small class and that we're already using technology for a mock job interview. Now, here's why I'm doing this. Most employers are now using teleconferencing for the first wave of job interviews. It's become so economical that it's better than flying a bunch of people out to your business when you can set up 10, 12, 15 Skype interviews for virtually nothing. All you have to do is just figure out something in your schedule. So this is a fantastic activity for us to use for our presentation skills, getting you used to the idea of being interviewed in a setting like this. Also, because the class is so nice and small, it's manageable for me to do these one-on-one. So this should be a really valuable experience. But again, notice it's a very small part of the point total. Now, as for what you end up doing in this mock job interview, I'll leave that up to you. You could either do this for a realistic job or maybe something like a med school interview that you're looking forward to, or you could go ahead and make something up because the activity would be the same whether it's a real job or a made-up job. But either way, you'll be able to practice some of the stuff we'll teach near the end of the term. Now, you've decided to take an online course because you needed to fit something into your schedule, or maybe you preferred to do it this way instead of taking the class in a live room. That's great, but remember, that puts a lot of requirements on you. The first requirement, of course, is that we're assuming, since you knew you were taking an online course, that you're ready to take an online course. So be sure to go to the Commons online. I'll be putting a link on there as soon as I get it from the center, and that will give you information about how to contact the library, get a weekly planner, how to set up your browser, things like that. And of course, since you're going to be doing video, you're going to need some kind of camera. And phones are fine, but you're going to need a way to prop the phone up firmly, and you might also need something to help out with audio. We'll talk more about that as we get into the first speech. But remember, you've decided to take the class in this format, so the requirements are on you to have a computer that can actually do the class and a camera that can get us the video. More importantly, this is true of all online courses, you are now in a self-directed learning environment. I can lay out the entire schedule, I can put all of these presentations online, but that doesn't mean you're going to learn unless you do the engagement on your own. So I can give you some tips though, because remember, good news is you're the master of your own destiny. The bad news is you're the master of your own destiny. So if you start to fall behind, I'm not really going to be able to catch up to you. I'll try to check in with you as often as I can, especially if I see that some folks are starting to disappear a little bit, but you're the one who's in charge of getting this stuff done. Here's the other key issue. Because this class is normally taught in 16 weeks and we're only doing it in 8, if you start to fall behind, the workload starts to pile up, and certain assignments simply can't be done if you don't do them on time. So be sure to get yourself a good schedule going. So here are my tips. First, set deadlines as alarms on your phone, tablet, and computer. I've made it, like I said, so that most deadlines are at 8 p.m. and then the due dates are listed on the schedule. Be sure to set yourself plenty of time in advance to get time to take care of all these assignments, and don't let things start to pile up on you. Remember to set aside time for reading and studying, not just time for completing assignments. One of the most common mistakes people make in the class is that they allow only enough time to do the job, but not enough time to do the reading. If you don't actually do the reading for the course, it will show up in your speeches. For example, if you don't read the chapter on how to use evidence and you don't listen to the presentation on how to use evidence, your speech will probably show that you didn't do those things. So be sure to allow time for both. And here's the process I would say to go through. When you look at the schedule I've given you, you should start by reading the assigned reading, and then after you've done that and taken any notes or highlighted your text in any ways you've wanted to, then watch the presentation, because my videos usually go just beyond what's already in the assignments. So if you've read the text, I'm assuming we already have that knowledge shared, and now I'm simply going to be elaborating on it and maybe even adding some things. And then after you've done both of those things is when you should take the quiz. It's a good habit to get into. That way you read it, watch it, and that will probably be the moment at which you have your own questions that you can contact me about. And then only after your questions have been answered should you move on to the quiz. So now that we've talked about the assignments in the class, we can move on to talk about a couple of the global course policies that affect everything that we do. The first of them is how I handle late or missing work. I basically tell students, treat the class like it's a job. If you were going to miss a shift at work, you would contact your boss in advance. And if you couldn't, then you would contact him or her almost immediately afterwards, as soon as it was possible to do so. You should take the same idea into most courses that you take. Now here's how it will actually play out. If the assignment was worth 10 points or less, like a quiz or a critique, then it can't be made up unless you've made arrangements. The main reason for this is that Foxtail actually only leaves those assignments open to you during the time window in which they're valid. Once the due date passes, they'll actually become locked up. You won't be able to use them. So make sure to contact me in advance. Now for the major assignments, the inform and the persuasive speeches, those lose 25% per day that they're late. The reason that hit is so big is that first, in the real world, it would be actually a 0 on the second day. Not meeting a deadline is often a firing offense in the real world, so I want to try to make some teeth in this policy for the same kind of reasons. But secondly, some folks actually give speeches late because they're afraid that the speech isn't good enough yet and they want to continue brushing it up. Unless you can brush up your speech 25%, it's probably better to do the speech on time. And also, since this is a public speaking course, we can't let you graduate from the class unless you've actually given both of the major public speeches. Even if mathematically it's possible to pass the course by only giving one of the two, we require that you complete both of them in order to receive a passing grade. Now, when it comes to plagiarism and academic dishonesty, we want to be sure that we're on exactly the same page. To avoid any possible confusion, if you present someone else's work as if it's your own, whether it's having somebody else take a quiz or copying a speech off of a website or citing somebody without giving them credit for the research you did from them, you are engaging in academic dishonesty. The way that I handle this is I spot check every single speech that you give. And if I find that you're using sources that came from a source that you do not reference, that's an indication of plagiarism. When in doubt, check with me on these. The minimum penalty for this kind of infraction is an automatic 0 on the assignment. Since the two major speeches that we're talking about here make up half of the course, that's an awful big hit and pretty much impossible to get up from. Now here's why it tends to happen. I've been teaching this class for a long time, and in my experience, most people who are attempted to cheat or plagiarize either do it because they didn't know what they were doing was academically dishonest, or they weren't sure, or they were afraid they weren't going to do a good enough job and thought that copying a speech would be better than actually writing their own. When in doubt, always check with me first. I'm always going to be more likely to work with you if you're contacting me before the mistake happens than if I catch you in the mistake. Don't make me into the detective. It's a lot easier if you let me stay as a teacher for you. Now finally, there are some additional resources listed in your syllabus, and I'll keep adding them into Foxtail as well. For example, Disability Services and the Academic Resource Center you probably already know about. Now since it's summertime, they might have some unusual hours or might be difficult to get in contact with, so be sure to allow extra time if you're going to use them. Also, the library sometimes has weird hours during the summer, or you might not be anywhere near Newburgh and therefore unable to use our library. But here's a link that the librarians gave us for our class. This is a link that's set up to handle many of the kind of research requirements that our students often use. If you need additional help, feel free to ask. Also, feel free to ask about anything. One of the things I love about teaching at George Fox is that it's kind of a full-service institution, meaning you can bring me any problem you have. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm an expert on all problems, but I am an expert on finding the people who can help you. So no matter what concerns you might have, anything that's making it hard for you to be a good student is something that I want to know about, because maybe I can work around it. Now, I don't want that to be taken to mean if you can bring me a story of something happening in your life that's difficult, that I'm just going to give you a free grade. That's not the case. It's more that I'm concerned about you as a person. I want to make sure you're doing well and try to get you the resources you need on that front. Be sure to check in with me. Now, if the problem you're having in life is my class, the first place you should always bring it is to me. Now, if you feel like you can't come to me, or if you feel like you've come to me and didn't get a good answer, you could then go to my chair, Steve Clausen. Now, the reason we use the policy this way is that if you were to take a problem directly to Steve, his immediate question would be, did you talk to Shannon about it? And we would start the whole process over again. When in doubt, check with me, but if you feel you need to, this is who you would go to next. Now that we've set up the basic idea for what the course is going to include, be sure to send me any questions you might have through the email that's listed on this course syllabus or through the immediate link that you've got on Foxtail. Either way, I want to be sure that we're all on the same page about how the class begins, and then we move into the first assignments of the course, including the first quiz, discussion, and the narrative speech. Take care.